June, which means we need to talk about May. So I read 7 books in the month of May. I was hoping to read a couple more. I was on a good fast pace to read more than that, but somehow I ended up reading 3 books that were almost 700 pages long. That slows you down, for sure. It took a while to get through those, but we did it. I had 4 books that the TBR jar picked out for me for this month, and I only read 2 of those books. I was hoping to read at least 1 more, but that's okay. There's always next month. We still have 7 books to talk through. Let's get into it. The first book I read in the month of May was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This book is pretty much the truest definition of a cozy fantasy. It's technically historical fantasy romance. So it takes place in early 1800s, probably 1815, 16, 17, something like that. It follows Dora, who had a run-in with a really evil, scary fairy when she was a little girl. This fairy stole half of her soul, and that basically means that she is a little quirky. She's a little weird. She doesn't operate in the London society as her family members do, as her friends do, and just as her peers do. So we are in London and we are entering the season, the London season, where people are going on the marriage mart, they're looking for husbands, they're looking for matches. It's very Bridgerton. It's very kind of high society, tea time, monarchy, all of that stuff. And so Dora, because she is missing half of her soul, she really has no interest in getting married because she knows that nobody would want to marry her anyway because she's not the typical London wife. So she's really there for her cousin to help her cousin find a match. But of course, Dora has a couple run-ins with a man named Elias, who is he's called the Lord Sorcier to the crown, which basically means he's a magician. And that's kind of where more of the fantasy aspect comes in. There's really not a ton of fantasy elements in this as a whole, except for the beginning when you are in the fairy realm and Dora gets her soul almost stolen. And then some of the magician magic stuff that Elias kind of pulls. So Elias and Dora strike up a bit of an agreement to get all of the ton and the society off of their backs for getting married. And so they court each other, but not actually. Neither of them want to get married, or so they think. There's also a little bit of a puzzle thrown in there. They are both trying to solve this mystery where children across the city are falling asleep and not waking up again. And so they spend a lot of time together solving this mystery, but also playing this game and tricking all of London society and the ton. And it's really sweet and just gives you kind of warm, fuzzy feelings. It's not a complicated book. It's not a book that is full of a lot of depth or character development, but even without that, it's just enjoyable. It's super fast paced and easy to read. It's only a couple hundred pages long. It's cute. If you're looking for something like a palate cleanser in between series, this is such a great pick for that. So I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 stars out of 5. The next book I read was one that a lot of people have been reading this month and the previous month. It is Abby Jimenez's new book, Just for the Summer. This one I have been waiting for a long time. I had read a couple other of her books. The first one I read was Yours Truly, which is in the same series as this, I believe, the Part of Your World series. And then I read a couple other ones of hers. She is a really, really wonderful writer. She kind of lives in the romance world where you think you're just picking up a quick romantic read, a beach read, a summer read that is not really going to affect you that much. And then she just gives you these characters that are really going through tough stuff, tough things that everybody can kind of relate to. She deals a lot with anxiety, depression. She writes it really, really well and wraps everything still in this beautiful package of like a cute romantic book. And she did it again with this one. She knocked it out of the park. So this is about Emma and Justin. Emma and Justin meet because of a Reddit thread where Justin posts that basically he is cursed and every woman that he dates breaks up with them, and then immediately goes on to find her soulmate, and they get married afterwards. And so Justin thinks that he's cursed and he's never going to find anybody, and he's just doomed to help other people find their soulmate. Emma sees this Reddit thread and realizes that she is also cursed. The exact same thing has been happening to her. She dates these guys, they break up after a couple of months, and then the guy goes on to get married and find a soulmate. So Emma comments on the Reddit thread, she direct messages him, and they start chatting a little bit. And one of them gets the idea to basically date each other, because if they date each other, then maybe the curse would cancel out. And then once they break up, they would both go on to finally find their soulmates. So they figure out a list of non-negotiables for the other relationships that they had been in, like how long did they need to date, how many times did they need to kiss, who needed to initiate things, what types of dates they're going on, that sort of stuff. They spend the summer checking off everything on that list so that when they break up, they'll find their soulmates. And of course, it is not as simple as that. There's a lot of family drama involved. Justin becomes the permanent guardian of his 3 younger siblings. Very unexpectedly, Emma has a crazy mother that barrels back into her life and throws everything into chaos. And so they're dealing with 2 sides of insane family drama while also trying to date each other to break a curse, but also they're sort of falling in love and really like each other in the real world. It's a lot going on, but I just feel like the writing in this is so strong that you're never really left behind in the story, and you're following it the whole time. The characters are so great and lovable. Emma is extremely frustrating, but it's very well deserved because of her backstory and her childhood being very traumatic and difficult. The decisions she makes in this book, while me as a reader, I'm tearing my hair out and so frustrated because if she made a certain decision, everything else would be easy and everything would fall into place. But she doesn't make those decisions. And even though I was extremely upset about it, I could understand and it felt deserved. And you're reading it and you're like, yeah, I hate this, but I get it. So it's that type of writing that Abby Jimenez just lives in. When I finished this book, I initially rated it, I think, a 4.5 stars. And I think that half a star missing from the 5 was truly because Emma frustrated me so much. As soon as I finished it, closed the book, walked away, started reading something else, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I keep recommending it to people, and every time I'm on Instagram or YouTube or anything and somebody's talking about Just for the Summer, I get really excited because I want to talk about Just for the Summer. And for me, that is actually a 5-star book. If I can't escape it after I finished it, if I keep thinking about it and keep talking about it, it's 5 stars. So Just for the Summer, a solid 5-star read. Oh boy. The Will of the Many, the next book that I read in May. This is by James Islington, who before this book I had actually never heard of, but he has written a pretty famous trilogy called the Lycaeus trilogy before this, and then hadn't written anything for a while, and then in May of 2023 came out with The Will of the Many. I didn't really see a lot about this book last year, but for some reason in maybe December or January of 2024, I could not escape this book. It was in every YouTube video that I watched. It was all over my Instagram feed. It was everywhere in bookstores and libraries. I'm not sure if it just picked up momentum a couple months after being released, but suddenly this book I could not escape. Everybody that I saw that had read it was rating it so highly. Not just people that read fantasy, people that read everything. Like I follow a lot of different genre readers, and there was a lot of overlap with this one. So I figured I would finally pick it up. This was my first over 600 or 700 page read of the month. It did take me quite a bit to get through it, not just because it's long, but also because it's a really kind of complicated magic system and complicated story, especially in the first couple hundred pages. This follows Viz, and we are in kind of an ancient Greece, ancient Rome society. The magic system is, I'm going to do my best to explain it, but it still is very difficult to put into words. It's easy to comprehend, but it's not easy to explain. Everybody in this world, the main country that we're in is Canaan, and everybody in Canaan has will, and they cede their will, or they give their will to higher people above them. And depending on where you are in the hierarchy, people will give their will to you. Will is power. Will is basically magic. Everything in this society, in this country, is kind of formed into pyramids, hierarchical pyramids. So whatever sect of career you're in, whether it's religion or military or the government, everything has pyramids. And at the top of the pyramid is the most powerful person in that sect of people. So everybody at the bottom is ceding will to the next rung of people on top, who are then ceding will to the next person on top, all going to the top dog. And in the entire country of Catanan, there are many, many pyramids that form other pyramids that form the entire society. A lot of people ceding will, a lot of people getting will. Will is power. If you are not getting any will, you barely have any way to make a living. You're most likely in fighting pits. You're most likely a slave to somebody else. So will really does run the entire system. So we follow Viz, who has never ceded will to anybody. He is, I think, 17 or 18, and he is a refugee from a different country that Catanan conquered. So he currently lives in Catanan, but he hates it. He is just trying to survive, just trying to get by unnoticed, and he's not really worrying about getting power or giving power. He's just trying to fly under the radar, which doesn't last super long because he gets noticed by this higher ranking official in the military who is looking for somebody to go basically undercover in this elite academy. This academy churns out young people to then go back into the system of military, religion, government, anything like that, and get pretty high up jobs and high up positions that continues to make this country exactly what it is. They're kind of indoctrinating all of these people that are going to the academy. There's some fishy stuff going on. There's things that aren't totally all kosher. This man sees Viz and kind of adopts him and makes him go to the academy to be a spy, essentially. So there's a lot of intrigue, there's a lot of tension, there's many, many twists and turns. Even just halfway through the book, there's a very large reveal that I was not expecting at all. I kind of expect it to get twisty nearer to the end, but it was like a really big twist in the beginning, and I flew out of my seat because I was so shocked by it. The writing is so great. The pacing of this book is really what makes it good, though, because it's so long and because it's so dense and can be kind of confusing. It needs to be paced well so that the reader is able to keep up or at least catch up. And I think he does a really good job with it. It took a lot of brain power for me to stay with it for sure, but it felt good to work my brain in that way. The ending is wild. I really can't say anything else without it being a major spoiler, and I know the second book is coming out. I don't know if it's in 2024, maybe in early 2025. So it was amazing. It was one of my favorite books I've read this year, if not my favorite book this year. Obviously, it's a 5-star, no question about it. If there's any book of the year that I would recommend, it would be this. Read The Will of the Many. Don't be intimidated by the size of it or the subject matter. Just do it. You won't regret it. The next book I read was a classic, truly, an Agatha Christie novel called And Then There Were None. I had read this before, maybe 10 years ago. I think I read it when I was 16 or 17. And so I knew the story, I knew the premise of it and what was going to happen as I was reading it, but I didn't remember who did it. And it's a big whodunit novel. So I read this as part of my book club that I do with some of my friends and my sisters. This one was really fun. I read this in one sitting. I think it took maybe 3 hours. It is really, really fast paced. It's obviously a small book, so even though it's kind of dense, the pages are just small pages. Like, the difference in size between these two books is funny. And Then There Were None went really, really fast. It follows these 10 characters that all go to a remote island together. Mysteriously, they start dying in very strange and bizarre ways, and it gets whittled down from 10 to none, you never find out who it is. One of the things that's really interesting about this book, and I remember this from the last time that I read it, in classic mysteries or just your run-of-the-mill standard murder mystery book, I feel like the author is leaving clues for you along the way to figure out who the murderer is. People can predict an ending to something, and some authors want you to. This is not the case with this one. In my mind, there is no way that you could ever figure out who was doing it and why they were doing it. And so the epilogue of this book is the longest chapter of the entire book, and it is the murderer explaining the motives behind all of these murders, the why. It's fascinating. It is really well written. It's one of my favorite Agatha Christie books that I've ever read. I haven't read a ton of hers, but I've read some of the heavy hitters of hers, and this one, it's my favorite. It's creepy in the best way. It's fast-paced, it's exciting, and the characters are all really, really interesting. So if you're gonna pick up any Agatha Christie novel, this is always a good one to start with. So I think I gave this one a 4 stars. The next book I read was The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren, which is actually not Christina Lauren. It is 2 authors that go under the pen name of Christina Lauren, Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings. I didn't realize that till about halfway through, but it makes sense as you're reading it. This follows our 2 main characters, Anna and Liam. Anna is a starving artist and Liam is a trust fund baby. So that's kind of a fun dynamic, but they meet in college 4 years or 5 years before the book actually takes place. They meet and they get married so that they can save money and live in family housing in college. They are roommates for a year in college, but they basically never see each other just because of their jobs and their class schedule, so they don't really know each other, but they sort of do. And then eventually Liam moves out, they get the marriage annulled, or so Anna thinks. But then flash forward to almost 4 years later or so, and Liam turns up on Anna's doorstep and basically drops the bomb that they are still married and he needs her to go to his sister's wedding on a remote island somewhere because his parents don't think that she's real, and if they don't think that she's real, then he doesn't get the rest of his trust fund money. And Liam says he'll pay her $100,000 to do this for him. And she agrees because, as previously stated, she's a starving artist. And her dad has cancer and she really needs to pay off his medical bills. So they go to this island and they spend a week together. Not much else happens after that. Liam is running from his father, who is a terrible person, and he doesn't want to be part of the family business, but he really wants money. Anna is just there trying to get money to pay her dad's medical bills, but she starts to fall in love with Liam. Liam starts to fall in love with Anna, but he's afraid that his horrible rich family is going to turn Anna into a terrible person as well and be corrupted by money. There's a lot going on. Honestly, I didn't like it. I didn't think that the writing was very good. I got it because I thought the premise sounded fun and cutesy, and again, like it could be a good romance pool read, but the writing was just so not my style. Everybody's kind of a brat in it. None of the characters I like. They're all annoying to me. It was a very predictable story, which is not always a bad thing. I love a good predictable romance, but there was something about this that just felt a little off to me. I think it was the characters being really entitled, very greedy. They fell in love really fast. They're only on this island for, I think, less than 10 days. And by day 3, they are suddenly essentially in love. The authors sort of make us believe that they face real trials and hardships during their time on the island, but it's actually really stupid stuff, like Liam getting in an argument with his dad and then stomping off and being sad about it, and Anna has to go and comfort him. But it just didn't feel deserved. It didn't feel real. I felt like the authors were trying to package this up as a book that had more depth to it than it actually does. I feel like this is a hot take because a lot of people seem to like this book so far, but it just wasn't for me, and that's okay. It was still a fast read. I finished it, I think, in 2 days, so it's not like I spent a long time with this and then didn't like it afterwards. I just wasn't for me. So I gave this 2.5 stars. 2.5 because I needed something fast and palate cleansing after The Will of the Many, and then there were none, so I just wanted a quick romance to jump into, so 2.5. The next book I read was on my Kindle, and it was the second book in the Serpent and the Wings of Night duology. This one is called The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. It's by Carissa Broadbent. And I don't actually think that this book was out in a paperback or a hardcover option at the end of May. And I think that it is officially being published June 4th, at least in the States, is when you can pick up your physical copy. Because even on Amazon, I wanted to buy the physical book because I have the Serpent and the Wings of Night physical book. It wasn't available until the first week of June, which is great. And I definitely want to pick up a copy, but I read this on Kindle. I loved Serpent and the Wings of Night. I rated it 5 stars, and I talk about it in a video where I basically am trying to figure out if I can predict 5-star reads and what makes a 5-star read. And I came to the conclusion that a 5-star read is just reading the right book at the right time. It's not necessarily objectively what is the best book and what is not a good book. For Serpent and the Wings of Night, I read that at the perfect time. I wanted to go back to that high fantasy, different world, sort of medieval vibe. I had been on a string of books that were all urban fantasy, and I was getting really burnt out on that, and it just wasn't reaching what I wanted it to reach. And so when I read Serpent and the Wings of Night, Serpent and the Wings of the Night, when I read the Serpent book, it just was exactly what I wanted. It's what I had been looking for a while. And so I rated it 5 stars. I really, really liked it. I was very excited to pick this one up. For some crazy reason, I did not remember the ending of the first book. And I couldn't actually really find a lot of summaries online. And I also couldn't find my physical copy of the last book. So I read most of the beginning and I didn't really remember what was going on or who some of the side characters were. And that's really my own fault. But once I got, like a third in or halfway in, it picked up and things started to click back into place and I was fine. But we are back with Oriah and Rain, and the way that the last book ends, they are not on the best of terms. They are back to being firm enemies, way more than even the beginning of the first book. So there's a lot of ground to make up here. And what I really appreciate about Carissa Broadbent is she makes up the ground in a great way. Like, what I loved about the first book was the pacing, and I think that carried into this as well. They start off as enemies in the beginning because Rain essentially betrayed Oriah. I won't say why or how, but he betrayed her in a big way. It wasn't like Oriah's overreacting. It's like, oh gosh, that was tough. And so Oriah takes a long time to forgive him. I think we get 60 to 70% through the book before things start to move in a good direction with them again. And as frustrating as that is as a reader, because you want them to be together, that's why you're reading the book, it makes sense and it felt deserved and it felt so amazing when they finally made up and were together again. So the romance of this book, coming off of the first book, 10 out of 10 stars. It was so great. The plot of this book compared to the first one, I struggled with. It felt very complicated. It felt very ambitious. It felt like there were 3 different climactic peaks of the entire book where you think the book is gonna end, like this has to be the final scene. It's so intense, and then it ends up not, and then they lose and they go back and they regroup, and then there's another very large climax point that happens, and it just kind of feels like you're being jerked around a lot in this book. This was also the next book I read that was a lot. I think this is almost 700 pages, and I don't think it needed to be 700 pages. With The Will of the Many, it felt like we had a lot to get through. We had a lot of foundation to lay, but in this one, the foundation was laid in the first book, and I feel like she could have cut out a solid 200 pages in this, and when we finally reached that climax, it would have ended nicely. It would have felt like it was paced really nicely. So the character development, the character relationships, and the romance was amazing and perfect, and I loved every second of it. The actual plot was a big bummer for me, and I didn't like it that much. It's very political. It's like she was trying to write a book kind of about politics, but also she was trying to write an action book at the same time, and they just were not gelling for me. So I feel like those things averaged out for me, and I gave it a 3.75. Another annoyingly specific rating, but that's where we're at. I am interested in the novella that she's written. Some of the characters in this book were from the novella, and I liked them. And so I want to read the novella. I do want to continue in this universe. I think Carissa Broadbent has a couple books that are planned in the Nyaxia universe. So I do want to read it because I like the vampires. I like the world that she's created. I think I'm ready to leave Rain and Oriah behind. This kind of does wrap up their story. I'd do it again. I'd read more from her. So that was Ashes and the Starker's King. And the last book I read was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This was also a TBR jar prompt. The prompt for this one was a book that intimidates you. This one has always intimidated me. I have had it probably since 2018. I just knew from talking with people that have read it to the synopsis itself, I just knew that it was going to be a really confusing book. And it was going to be very metaphorical and unique writing. And it was all of those things. And I had a hard time getting into this book. Nothing happens in it until probably the last quarter of it, maybe the last third. We are following our main character, Piranesi, which... This is how vague and strange the writing style was. We meet our main character, Piranesi, immediately. Maybe this is intentional and it's just not my style and that's why I didn't like it, but I'm a very visual person and I want to be able to picture the characters really easily. And this author, did nothing to describe what this character looked like. So I was picturing him as a satyr the whole time. And then come to find out like halfway through, Piranesi's actually a human. And I didn't realize that. And then the way that she described him as a human was completely different than something that I was picturing. Even the way that she writes him, he sounds like a 12-year-old, like a little boy, but he's actually a grown man. I think her writing style is just very vague. It's very vague and poetic and artistic. And I do enjoy that type of writing, but I feel like the story suffered because of it. We were so focused on the way that she was writing it, and what she was writing actually gets lost, which was the story. I literally feel like there wasn't a story until halfway through. It's just describing the setting. We're in this whimsical, ethereal house, and this house has many, many rooms, like hundreds and hundreds of rooms and hallways, and there's an ocean that surrounds the house, and the tides are in the hallways, and it's just a lot of that, just describing the house and describing what Piranesi does in the house, which is fish and take care of the statues. The house has a lot of statues in it. The satyr is one of these statues. That's what he does. About halfway through is when I start to realize what is actually going on, which is that potentially Piranesi was a human in the real world and he joined a cult, and this cult actually was magical and found an in-between world, which is the house, and then would send people to the in-between world and they would trap them there. There's a lot going on. I didn't like it. I don't know what else to say about it, except that if you are into very artistic, very strange and unique writing, you should totally give it a read. It's not that long. It's only like 250 pages long, and it went pretty fast. It's just that I didn't enjoy it, so it felt like it went really, really slow. It's fine. It wasn't the best way to end the month, but we did it, and I gave this a 2 stars. So that was May. May was one of the most diverse months that I've had in a while, from genre to length to authors to ratings. I had 2 5-star ratings, and then I had 2 that were 2 stars or 2.5 stars. So we had a wide spectrum, and it was fun and it was exciting. If you take anything away from this, it's to read The Will of the Many, and then as a palate cleanser to read Just for the Summer after that. So there we go. That's May. Now we're on to June. See you next time.